This is Foundations of Math and Pre-Calculus 10. We're looking at Chapter 1.1 and Part 2. So, referents are used to estimate, and we choose an appropriate referent for the size of the object. And you should choose appropriate units for any measurement. And the units imply a certain amount of accuracy, and this is important in science. So, rule of thumb. Minimize the number of decimals. So let's just start off with our regular units. What are the appropriate units? If we're going to measure the distance to another city, it should be kilometers. If we're measuring the room sizes in a house, this should be meters. If we're measuring the size of bugs, we should use millimeters, unless it's a very large bug, then you might want to use centimeters. Heights of students. So this is normally done in centimeters, or optionally it can be done with meters with decimal points. And lengths of salmon. So this would be centimeters would be appropriate. Now, let's look at reference. The problem with reference is that they vary with each person. The measure can be quite different between a child's hand versus an adult's hand. And even amongst adults, the measure can be different. And before standardization in 1959, each country used their own definition for measurements. You can see that this would make it difficult to collaborate in science or do trade in business. So, if you're going to have an appropriate referent, it will have a consistent number over multiple measurements. So if you're measuring the height of the horse with hands, you better get 17 each time if that's the height of the horse. If you get 17, 16, 18, that's not a very good referent. What are appropriate referents to measure the width and height of a book? You could use thumb widths. Dimensions of a couch. You could use hands or forearm. Dimensions of a cell phone. So since cell phones are pretty small these days, you might have to go with pinky width. And to measure the thickness, you might need to use coins. Dimensions of a house. You might want to use strides. And if we're using the imperial system, a stride would be a yard. Dimensions of a dime. This is a tough one, but you could use something like paper clips. Okay, metric calipers. They offer more precision over a ruler. However, you may not use a caliper again in your life, but you want to learn how to use tools because there's thousands, in fact, probably millions of tools, and you may need to use a few in your life. So you want to be able to use any tool. So if you learn to use this, you have a better chance of learning how to use all the other tools out there. This is our main scale, and this is our Vernier scale. And we get our leading digits by reading the main scale, and we read the 0 from the Vernier scale. We read the line to the left of the 0. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so we have 2.6 centimeters. On this Vernier scale, we have the tenths, but we also have 0.5 of the tenths. So this gives us 2 extra digits. The last digit can only be 0 or 5. So we look for where the main scale lines up with the Vernier scale. And this doesn't line up, that doesn't, that doesn't, that doesn't, that doesn't, that doesn't. And we just keep going. And we see that it lines up right here. Okay? So this Vernier scale is just to the right of this main scale. And we see this mark is just to the left of this main scale. So that means this is our answer. So the trailing digits are 0.080. And that means we have 2.680 centimeters, or 26.80 millimeters. Note the bottom scale is only accurate where there are lines. So you can't read between the lines and say that this is 2.681 or 2.682. It's just not that accurate. The only accuracy we have is 0 or 5. Let's try another one. So we read how many tick marks are off the main. This is 3.1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it doesn't quite reach 6. 3.5 centimeters. And let's see where they line up on the bottom. And we just keep going across. Here, this is slightly to the right of the main, and here, this is slightly left of the main. So this is perfectly lined up, and it's at 0.090 centimeters. So we have 3.590 centimeters, or 35.90 millimeters. So calipers are pretty accurate if they're calibrated properly. It gives us 2 decimal places with millimeters. It's very hard to do that with a ruler. And you need to be aware that calipers have different measures. Okay, some of them will only have tenths. They won't have that extra 0.05 millimeter. And some will be coarser. And for extra practice, you can go to this web address, and this will simulate this caliper. And that completes this lesson.